These former admissions officers have been asked to evaluate this IvyWise student's college application. They'll share both the profile and essays so you can see what it takes to get admitted.
Hi, I'm Amanda. I'm an admissions counselor here at IvyWise and formerly an admissions officer at Brown University and Eugene Lang College at the New School for Liberal Arts in New York City.
Hello, I'm Robin, college admissions counselor with IvyWise. I worked in college admissions at Vanderbilt and Georgetown University, and I was also a director of college counseling at 2 independent high schools and was a high school English teacher.
Hi, I'm Victoria, and I'm a college admissions counselor with IvyWise as well. I formerly worked at the University of Chicago and Sarah Lawrence College as an assistant director of admissions, and I worked in an independent high school as a college counselor for 4 years as well.
So today we're going to be discussing the profile and application elements of an IvyWise student, and then we'll reveal all the schools where that student was admitted. So what you see here is a profile of the student, and this is a student who is interested in psychology. The student attends a public high school in New York City, 3.97 GPA. The student's top 3 schools are Johns Hopkins, University of Notre Dame, and the University of Southern California. As I mentioned, the student is interested in psychology as well as neuroscience, biology, and then highest SAT score, ultimately a 1420. In terms of extracurricular activities, the student authored a children's book about basically an overview of the brain for middle school students. This is a student who conducted research with a college professor on motor function and spinal cord injury, and also is a certified EMT. The student also founded the Rubik's Cube Club at their high school, was involved in taking some summer classes at Johns Hopkins and Brown, specifically related to their interests in the brain, neuroscience, etc. And the student involved with table tennis, badminton, and community service through their church. And then in terms of academics, here you can see the courses the student has taken throughout high school and the grades earned in those classes. So overall, Victoria, what are your thoughts on this student's profile?
I think this student does provide a very strong profile, both with like hard numbers, right? Like we're seeing really rigorous courses here, lots of APs across different core subject areas, which is great to see. That's what colleges are going to want to see for selective schools. A's across the board, which we know many students are going to be in these competitive pools having these rigorous courses along with the A's. But it's nice to see that the students take an initiative in their extracurriculars to kind of do things that aren't just clubs offered at school. They've gone outside the box and really explored those interests in unique and novel ways, like, you know, pun intended, with this book that they've created. And I think that that is something that's going to stand out to the committee, is that they're very involved in their community, and they're very involved in a lot of different types of activities, but also that they have really doubled down in research and writing these books in areas of interest.
And Amanda, any other thoughts about the student's profile, especially as a psychology a student who intends to study psychology?
Yeah, I mean, just to go off of what Victoria was just saying, I also just see a lot of leadership and initiative in the extracurriculars. And so apologies, maybe not directly related to psychology, but I love the initiative and the leadership I'm seeing in the extracurriculars, from founding a club, which we'll see later. You know, Rubik's Cube is really important to this student and really meaningful. So to found that club and lead it, I think took a lot of initiative, and, you know, and led the student to do something that they were really that they really cared about. But everything from that to becoming an EMT, to being the captain of the table tennis team, I was really impressed by all of that. In addition to the course load, the course load also tends, I think, there's a lot of sort of just advanced work in the sciences and math, and so coming in with a kind of science and math a stronger background in science and math, I think will really be beneficial for a student who's applying to psychology. I think that sometimes psychology gets construed in the admissions process as somewhat of a lighter science, right? Or a social science where, students who are not necessarily interested in or strong in math and science and the hard sciences tend to drift. But this is a student who's performing really well and taking AP BC calculus and AP chemistry in the senior year. And so that interest in science and psychology, I think, can really come together to really help them out in the application process. So here we have the Common App personal statement, and this is the first draft. So I'll just read out the prompt. Some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that is so meaningful they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, then please share your story. So, Robin, what do you? I know you've read through this first draft. What do you make of this first draft of the student's essay?
Yeah, I mean, overall, for a first draft, I really liked the topic in general. I think it's the right topic for the student to be writing about. So there's a lot to build on from this, which is exciting to see. And so for me, I did feel like this first draft is a little heavy on just the narrative. There's a lot of telling in this first draft. And so I found myself wanting more descriptive language used. And I especially wanted to see the student go into more detail regarding how the brain and Rubik's Cube are similar. I think there's a great opportunity there for the student to make that personal connection to their academic interests. But overall, for a first draft, I thought this was a solid go at it. Victoria, what about you?
Yeah, I felt the same. I think that this draft I've seen much worse first drafts, so it's definitely in a good place to be built upon. But there were some elements of this where I was really yearning for some more personal connections, things that were a little bit more of a reflection on how these things make the student feel and how it might connect to other aspects of their life. But now it's very heavy on the Rubik's Cube, which makes sense because that's kind of the through line of the piece. But I think there is a chance to move beyond just the Rubik's Cube and get a little bit more into depth on those academic interests, and then also how this mentality applies to other aspects of the student's life.
Yeah, I was really looking for a stronger connection between the Rubik's Cube and the brain. I saw the student trying to make that connection. I thought that the word mystery, that the brain is a mystery, just like the Rubik's Cube, but actually the Rubik's Cube is a puzzle that we can solve. It's not a mystery. And so I wanted more about sort of how is the brain like the Rubik's Cube and vice versa. So now we're going to move on to the final draft. So Victoria, what do you make of this revision here?
Yeah, this revision, I think it just took what was already a great idea and really made it flow in a way that I didn't have to infer what he meant by certain aspects of how the Rubik's Cube, is directly related to the study of the brain, how his logical problem-solving brain wants to go into this study of, neuroscience psychology because of the kinds of elements you see here in his personality through the solving of Rubik's Cubes. I also really enjoyed that there were more elements of like a personal nature about like his grandmother. And when I was reading the story about him coming from Hong Kong, you kind of are in the moment, you see it, you could feel it a little bit more. He's showing us more of what that felt like than just telling us. And all of these little personal elements throughout the essay give me a fuller picture of who I'm reading about, which is really important because this is the one piece where you get to identify, here's the type of person I might be on your college campus. Here's my personality. This is what matters to me. This is what I value. This is who I am. And I think this achieves that with these very subtle moments where we see him in his day-to-day life, in addition to the story about the Rubik's Cube and what he wants to study. So all of those are important elements of a personal statement. And this draft really has that in a way that I think the first draft did not.
Robin, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with really everything Victoria said. I loved seeing how the student took what was initially just a really solid idea in the first draft and just really reworked it, which created, for me, I felt more of a connection with the student. I liked the reworked opening paragraph, putting you right in the moment. He's here in the U.S. and he's looking at his textbook, and it looks like gibberish. How is he going to figure this out immediately? There's that connection to the brain and whatnot. He does a nice job of getting more specific about the Rubik's Cube and how, like, I like in that third paragraph, he talks about how you're trying to group the same colors on the Rubik's Cube to solve the puzzle, and likewise different parts of the brain need to work together. And then the student goes a step further and provides a specific example, talking about the primary motor cortex, the premotor motor cortex, which not only is that a great descriptive term to use, but it demonstrates the student's knowledge of the brain that he's already developed. So if I'm an admissions officer, I really like seeing that. And then I know Victoria mentioned this as well, but I also liked that there was more of an explanation as to why this student is interested in Alzheimer's specifically, because it's mentioned in the first draft, but we don't know why exactly. Here we get that personal connection. So just overall, the additional detail, the personal elements just really bring this final draft to life.
And I'd say too, as like a final cherry on top of a personal statement is, I think it's having nice writing, having beautiful writing full of imagery is like the cherry on top of this piece, right? So there's these moments where we get the stickers are peeling off the cube of the Rubik's Cube,
Yeah.
and I can
Yeah.
picture it, right? So it draws us in, it keeps us reading it. You have to remember that admissions officers are reading, thousands of essays over the course of the reading cycle, and often, hundreds and hundreds of essays in a day. And if you can fill their mind with like some beautiful images, that's going to stick with them a little bit more. I think, when we're reading, having something that is written very like nicely with an extra layer of imagery, it does not hurt. So I don't think that's always the first goal. The first goal is we want really solid content and to learn about the student, but the like cream of the crop is when it's also fantastically written and we can picture the things that you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that description really demonstrates a love for that Rubik's Cube. If the stickers are peeling off, then he doesn't have to say, I do this all the time. We know that, just by seeing that image of the stickers.
Right, so right now we're going to look at the students' supplemental essays for the University of Notre Dame. And they have several short little essays that the student wrote, and we'll review a few of these. So the first one is, what is distinctive about your personal experience and development? For example, family support, culture, disability, personal background, community, etc. And why are these experiences important to you? And how will you enrich the Notre Dame community? For 150 words max. That's actually a lot of different things to answer in a very short space. So Amanda, what do you think about this first draft as you read it? What does that tell you about the student?
So I like that the student is reaching back. So this is a student who's come from Hong Kong to the US in 8th grade. And so they're sort of reaching back to where they came from, where their education began, in order to tell us about sort of do a kind of compare and contrast between their old educational system and their new educational system. I like that. And I like that we can, kind of look back and see where the student comes from. So I love that this student addresses this question by looking back to where they came from. So this is a student who came from Hong Kong to the US in 8th grade. And so this sort of looking back to the education that he had in Hong Kong, the education style, how he learned, and comparing it to when he came to the US, I thought was really interesting and a really good way to approach this question. I was struck in the first draft by how there was sort of like a negative kind of perspective regarding the Chinese style education in Hong Kong. And, as much as I can appreciate that maybe the student was not so didn't feel so connected to that style of learning and that style of education. I think it's important to kind of maintain kind of diplomacy and even positivity about certain things. When we get too negative, then that doesn't necessarily sort of help in the process. So in the final draft, I can see that he's turned it around to be a bit more diplomatic, a bit more positive, sort of talking about the things that did kind of help in Hong Kong and the things that from Hong Kong that he could bring to the US that sort of helped him navigate his education here, while also being able to embrace, being expressive, talking to his teachers in a more direct and casual way. So I really liked that a lot. When he talks about his extracurriculars and what he'd like to do at Notre Dame, it's definitely much more specific in the final draft. I do think that there are ways to, to say that he wants to become involved in the Asian American community, if he wanted to continue with that. But the key is specificity. I want to join these clubs and I want to do X, Y, and Z when I'm there in Notre Dame in those clubs. And that's what happens in the final draft here.
Yeah, I like how he turned the tone in this, as you said, Amanda. Instead of like the word introvert or reticent isn't used once in the final draft. Instead, self-reliant is used, which just has a more positive connotation. And even though the examples used in the first draft, as far as the Asian American Association, the Chinese Culture Society, those are totally great examples to use. But what I like that the student did in the final draft is that the global engagement program that's mentioned, and he says specifically how he would like to be a peer mentor, that's essentially the same idea that student's conveying in the first draft. And it's just a much better example that really demonstrates how this student wants to help support international students to adjust to the education here. I mean, that's the last sentence of the first draft. And here in the final draft, we have a really good example to support that. And I also like how the student indicates that, he wants to continue doing the EMT work as well. So it's nice to see how an activity that the student's currently part of is something that, he wants to continue with once he's at Notre Dame. So I really get a sense of that student being active and contributing to the Notre Dame community.
Yeah, I think all of those are excellent points because the first draft had a lot of good content, but I think it really benefited from some strong reorganization. First of all, there's now 2 paragraphs that are very clear in what he's trying to get across in each of those, which is so important with 150 words, because when it's all clumped together and there's a lot of sentences that maybe aren't as specific as they could be, we're losing out on the opportunity to really put in those specific things that make it a lot clearer what the student wants to get across at each of the things that they're talking about here. And I really felt that this second one was just so much clearer in the organization and the wording of even certain things. And then those word choices, as you said, Robin, are important because we want to keep things upbeat. And this is, it is giving a sense of who you're going to be on campus, and you want people to find you likable and approachable and all of those wonderful things. So let's look at the next one, which is the essay, describe a time when you advocated for something you believed in and influenced others through thoughtful discourse to promote a deeper understanding of a difficult situation. So, thoughts on the first draft of this piece. I'll start us really quickly by saying I immediately, when I first read this, thought, who's Bosco and why are we reading about him so suddenly? Like there is sort of no intro into Bosco and why we're hearing about Bosco. And then when you read the second draft, it becomes clear that this is not an essay about Bosco at all. It's really about, a totally different aspect of his life. So what are your guys' thoughts?
What I had noticed in the first draft of the essay, there isn't any real solution to the problem. So in a question that's asking, how did you deal with a difficult situation? How did you influence someone else to deal with a difficult situation? We don't really get any sort of resolution. Bosco is still having a hard time. And we don't, or we assume so because the student isn't telling us that Bosco's attitude or feelings about his situation have changed at all. So that's what I was really looking for, is what did you do and how did things change after you did what you did? In the final draft, we can see, that he had some input, he had some influence, and he was able to come, to a resolution with his parents in order to help his father with the problem that he had. And so that was the biggest thing that I noticed between the two essays.
Yeah, I mean, this is a challenging essay prompt, and a lot of schools have prompts that are somewhat similar to this that ask students to recall, a difficult conversation they had, or where different views were expressed, or something along those lines. Plus, in this case, it can only be 150 words, so it's really important that words are chosen carefully, and that the student is actually asking or answering what the prompt is asking. And so, my reaction when I read the first draft, my immediate reaction was, this doesn't answer the prompt at all. There's no example of thoughtful discourse in the first draft. Now, could it have been reworked to stick with Bosco, and it may be an example of a conversation, dialogue, exchange between the student and Bosco? Perhaps then it would answer the prompt. But right now, that first draft, it just, for me, doesn't answer the prompt at all. So then there's this pivot to a completely new topic in the final draft, which works much more effectively, because here now we have a very personal example that's used, which also connects to the student's interest in, the brain, health, medicine, etc. And we get a clear example of a type of discourse or exchange here in terms of the type of treatment for the student's father's lower back pain and whatnot. So I think just pivoting to a totally new topic here that better demonstrates this idea of thoughtful discourse, because it's so important to look at the key words in these essay prompts. It just works much, much better than that first draft.
Yeah, I agree. And then I will say too, from a standpoint of thinking about a student who wants to study psychology and mental health, presumably as a part of that, right? That the first one, there's a sort of problematic angle from which he's approaching mental health, which is to say it's, oh, just your religion is going to help you, right? And so like that could be very true for some people, but some people might need other interventions, which is something that psychology looks at, is what are other ways to approach things. So to just have a student who's interested in psychology say that this is the way that you should solve it is slightly problematic to me. It doesn't kind of illustrate that you're a student who would want to approach psychology from multiple angles, and that's something I would want to be hearing about. So if there isn't, like you said, Robin, a more discourse surrounding that type of topic, it might be better to move on to a different topic that would allow you to show that discourse.
So we're going to take a look at some of the shorter supplemental responses for Notre Dame. This one, what brings you joy? More than 50 words here, which is tough. So we've got the first draft, final draft. Amanda, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, night and day. We're writing about the same thing in the first draft and the second draft. But in the final draft, we've got specificity. We have language that kind of puts us right into the feeling of following sports, watching sports, being excited about sports. So between the pick six, 2-point conversion, to just kind of walking through, whenever I watch a game, the player's passion and skill inspire me, and then reviewing that, he loves to look, he looks at it in the morning, he watches it at night. It is a big part of his life. It's a big part of his day. I just think there's a lot more energy in the final draft as opposed to the first one, where it's just sort of narrating, I like, even just looking at the first line. watching sports games, especially basketball and football, whereas we can really see and hear and feel the joy in the second draft. So just inserting some of that energy, changing that language, especially on these 50-word, really small supplements, I think just really helps to, changing just a couple of words is, you have the space to do that sort of thing. These don't have to be boring. In fact, they can be really fun.
Yeah, I think it's important that every word in a 50-word response is really utilized effectively. And this one is almost just repeating the prompt and then like telling you some things. And also, I will note that one thing that we work with students, in addition to thinking about how to make imagery come alive and choose different words and all that, is like grammatical corrections, right? Like in a 50-word response, the grammar like is really important, and I immediately am like, don't want to be drawn to the grammatical error in the first draft, but I am, right? So you need to get out of that so that we can get more to what you're actually trying to tell me, so I don't hang up on those types of things.
So now we'll move on to another one that's sort of very specific to Notre Dame as a Catholic school. And I think we can think about this question in the same way that we think about other supplements, that are very specific to the school, and a sort of, why do you want to come to this school in particular? So here we have, how does faith influence the decisions you make? Robin?
Yeah, it's really important for students to realize how the different supplemental essays all work in conjunction together. So you really have to think about the different topics you're writing about for each specific prompt. And I know at IvyWise, we spend a lot of time with our students helping them see that. So we just saw the prompt about joy. We learned about his love of sports, and now here, something much more specific to Notre Dame. So my thought was, with the first draft, that it was way too generic, and that Notre Dame likely reads a lot of essays like that. It's not specific enough. And again, with 50 words, every word matters. It needs to be specific. And there's just nothing in that first draft that is specific enough. So then we shift to the final draft, where we get a very specific example of how the student is taking, as the student writes, the skill that God granted him, and utilizing it to help with his church, the Sunday service, using his knowledge of technology to help at his church. And to me, like, to be able to walk away from that essay with a much clearer sense of the student's connection to his faith and how he's using, a talent to help others connect with their faith at the Sunday service. It just works so much more effectively than the first draft.
Yeah, and this student really showed rather than just told in that second draft, right? They told us in the first draft a bunch of things that they've done, but they didn't, again, give us those specifics. And then the second draft, they show us some scripture that's meaningful to them, and they show us how they're going to continue to do that, utilize their skill at Notre Dame. I think that's really important.
It's time to reveal where our student got in and where he ultimately decided to go. We've shown you the Notre Dame application, but he's applied to many other schools. So this student was admitted to Johns Hopkins, Notre Dame, University of Southern California, Tulane, Boston University, and Case Western Reserve. He was deferred from Northeastern, so that's the only school he didn't get into. But overall, he had a really successful application process. And in the end, he wound up going to Notre Dame.
We hope you enjoyed this video and found our commentary to be insightful. Please remember to like and subscribe. At IvyWise, we have over 440 years of combined experience at some of the world's top institutions. Check out our website to learn more about our admissions counseling, tutoring, test prep, and research services, and for a plethora of resources to help you get your college prep on track.
Contact IvyWise today to learn more about our services, including our signature roundtable, which simulates the real-world admissions committee evaluation process.